Hello, my name is Jubal. In this video, I want to talk about the most regrettable thing and grateful things in my life. It's gonna be very personal and just bear with me. So, here we go. So, number one most regrettable thing I wish I got to do or never have done or never got to do is going to the arcades as a kid. And I know it sounds way off, I know it sounds way off, but like, why the arcades, And the reason is because, you hear your parents or your uncles, aunts, or whoever who grew up during the 90s and early 2000s when the arcade was the rage. I never got to experience that. They always talk about, oh, I played this arcade, I played that arcade. It was fun. And me, since I'm a big gamer dude, I love video games. Back then I heard that if you play video games as a hobby, you will get looked down upon. I know there's some people may agree on that, and it sucks. I didn't get to do that. Even though the arcade culture and the arcade scene died out, I never got to experience it, and I wish when the arcade scene was still popular, I wish I could go there, but I heard also you need money to get those quarters. So that one, I regret not going. And one of the most grateful things, I'm really grateful, is my friends. It sounds basic, like you're basic saying you're grateful for when you're in a Thanksgiving meal party. And the reason is, because growing up, and I explained it in my past couple of videos, but I'll repeat it like a broken record. I grew up in a very enclosed environment, very enclosed environment. When you're enclosed, there's very limited things you could do, which I think that what brings creativity to the kids, in the enclosed environment. And plus you're in an industrialized area, you have to get creative. So there was this one friend that I talked to, and I'll say his name now for bashing or negativity. No, his name is Fernando. And the reason I'll give him flowers to him the most was because, we grew up in the same area. We played video games. We played physical games. What I mean physical games, you play with the other children. You play tag, football, baseball, you know, other other things, kids like to do. And also, I would help him out with some things, and he will help me out with some things. And I wouldn't, I wouldn't sound selfish or sound crazy, but I wouldn't be here without him, you know. And I would consider him as my best friend, like my actual best friend. So, yeah. So the second most regrettable thing is standing up to bullies. I know that's the one thing I wish I would defend myself, mostly because in elementary school I got bullied, hard. And not because I was fat or anything. I was, I would try to, try to include myself in other friend groups, not because of attention, it's because, I don't want to be called out on or be the odd one in the group. Because, society back then was really fucked up, so even now it's more acceptable because, how everything's going on. But back then it was really fucked up. So, but there was these two kids, remember, and three, which I mentioned. They were the twin brothers. Their name was Christian and Johnny. These kids were the elementary school bullies, and I remember they had some personal shit going on at their home because they would blat it out. Kids, when you hear some personal shit, from your parents, you always blat it out to your classmates / friends. And yeah, I remember as clear as day. They're like, oh, my dad, he got deported, some shit like that, and I was like, as a kid, I wouldn't say I was sympathetic, but I didn't know their father, because I know their mothers, because they would show up in parent conferences or special events that the school would do. So and I don't know what bothered me. And also, I know it sounds more fucked up, I'm saying it, throughout my days in elementary school, I remember they were they were excluding this white girl. If I remember, her name was Sophia. She was the most annoying and nobody got along with her. I remember I said something that was very racist, I won't say. It was very racist. They're like, oh wow. Which the twin brother called me out. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, I don't, but at that moment I was like, fuck, I really said that shit. But I got away with it. No trouble, no nothing. And yeah, so in middle school, high school, I never got bullied. Every day where there's two things that'll come in your mind when you get bullied: suicide and shooting people. That's the only two optional ways it's gonna go through. The third one, if you're really strong enough mentally, you just move on, you know. But it is what it is. So the second most grateful thing of my life, and before I said the second most grateful thing, I know the other bully named Zeppelin I said in the last couple of videos, you know, even though I called him out, you know, because he was a massive fuck up, and that dude was really a definition of a pendejo, you know. So, you know, I said in that video that, you know, I'm just telling you, you know, you're a massive fuck up, you know, and your only way you wanna try to get to me is either try to kill me or try to fight me to death, you know. And that's what I said about Zeppelin. So then I know we're adults, you know, so we gotta let this shit go. But I'm just telling you, I'll just telling that video that he was a massive fuck up. That's about it. And his parents were horrible as shit too, and his brother. So yeah. So the second most grateful thing I would say is my parents, you know, / family. I know it sounds like another base hill. I'm grateful for my family, you know, just to get over with. I'm saying this truly deep in my heart, you know. Deep in my heart because they were they helped me out a lot. You know, went through school and outside of school. They tried their best. And you know, in that last update video, on the life update, I was saying that I was moving out. I'm still grateful. Of how it helped me out. And they supported me to this very day. So yeah. My third most regrettable thing I had done, or I wish I should have done, is hurting a kid, you know. I know for out of context it sounds like whoa, what the fuck happened? And you know, when my parents in the LA Fitness gym, I was put in this like daycare shit. It was called a kids club there because it was a very specific location. They did. And I remember as a kid, I always run over people. You know, I would run over people. And not because, you know, I was being an asshole, but because I was playing almost like a roughhouse type of style play. So I would get in trouble. And the one time I almost got in a fight in the kids club at Elite Fitness. You know, because this kid started like throwing shit like it was playing like an MLB league. And yeah, I'll start throwing shit. You know, I start throwing shit because then I didn't know, you know. So I'll just start throwing. And, I forgot what he said, something. I remember he laid down on the ground. And I remember I stomped his leg. And he's like, wait. Oh, I think you broke my leg, or I think you broke my back or something. And as a kid, I was terrified. I'm like, oh shit. You know, like, oh shit. I really hurt somebody. You know, that was my thought. You know, because growing up, I was never put in, like, I was really in a rough environment where I'm used to getting fights every day and shit like that. So to me, it was shocking, you know, because the other kids were like playing rough as shit, you know. So I play rough, you know. That's about what I did, you know. So the third most grateful thing is tough. Oh, it is the LUSD or other work force places, employees. I'm grateful for them. And to put it in more simpler or Barney style, you know, I was a kid who had trouble with a lot of shit from the schools and other workplaces I will be put into. And I don't know, but I don't want to say I had like disability. And I think I explained it or not, but I'm not sure. But I do have disabilities, you know. You know, and the reason is because of the genetics, you know. My parents, you know, whenever something happens in a gene mutation, a pool, you know, you get disability, you know, Down syndrome, ADHD, or OCD, fucking anything, you know, any disabilities you could think of known to man. And these employees who, you know, helped me out, I'm grateful because, you know, I had a really hard time to fit in, which is one of the partial reasons, or mostly the big reasons I got bullied, was because of my behavioral issues I had. So you know, they helped me, you know, they helped me get back on track, you know. I'll say that mostly I'm grateful for them helping and shaping who I am. That includes my parents as well. You know, and I'm here. I'm alive. Yeah, and I think the fourth most regrettable thing I wish I should have done was giving money to this kid to buy me an airsoft gun. And I know it sounds crazy, but when I was younger, I would watch videos like airsofts, people in the airsoft leagues, like doing these like crazy shots, do these crazy things, like to win the game. I was obsessed, I bought my first airsoft gun. It was like a pistol. Yeah, I want to train how to shoot a gun to this day, except I'm buying a real gun, but I hope the gun laws are not more strict than ever. And I remember I was going to this big fucking field trip, and at the time it was like a huge deal, and I was part of the group too, so that made it extra exciting. So I remember I was in my 5th grade class, just doing some word problem / homework problems, and this kid, his name is Andrew. He was like, "Hey man, I heard you're trying to buy an airsoft gun." And like, "Yeah." He's like, "Hey, can you give me some cash?" My mom put cash in my wallet, to buy other things, like gift shop items or food. That's about it. I like, yeah, I gave him all my money, and that was about it. Until I got in trouble, So they sent me to the principal's office, they took me in, and they took this other kid who also was a bully, because he had like records that look like, that sound like a criminal record. and they're like, hey, really, and I thought I was gonna get expelled, to be honest, because schools take this to heart. When you say, "Oh, a gun," you take a gun to school, to try to expel you, and I was scared. I was like, "Oh shit!" And then what happened was, it was a slap to the wrist for me and to him. Well, actually, Andrew, he got a harsher punishment. With me, I didn't get like suspended or anything, because I have disabilities, the disability card. I got away scot-free. But at the time, I thought I was gonna get expelled, because when you get sent to the principal's office, you think of the worst of the worst. So I wish I should have not give Andrew the money before I went to the Catalina trip. So that's the one thing. It was one, I think the 4th was regrettable things I done. So yeah. Now the 4th most grateful thing I'm really grateful for is my uncles. My uncles, they tried to help me out. I want to get in personal shit, but they went through a harsh life. They lived through a harsh environment that I don't think anybody would survive on. I know it sounds like I'm talking to another another planet saying, oh, this shit was bad. They said this shit was bad, this and that. But I'm grateful for them helping me out, and I love them for that. And yeah. And I'm help my parents and me will also help them out too, so it's kind of even. So the fifth of this will be my last one. The fifth or the final most regrettable thing is reading, And the reason I said reading because, growing up, I'm talking about in the 2000s era. Some people remember it, I know some of them are old by now. But in the 2000s, everybody was outside all day, every fucking day, And I was that kid because, I wanted to be outside. I wanted to be in the house all day, You get like claustrophobia and also you get depressed. So I would, what's it called? I had a whole collection of Curious George. Is a children's book. I would read all the Curious George, and then I stopped reading for whatever reason. I stopped reading, and then around 6th grade, they did a test on a kid's Lexa level performance. On how high is your level on Lexa level. If your level is a little bit low or the lowest, they'll try to help you improve your reading comprehension, if you know what I mean. It'll help you with your reading comprehension. And I kind of wish, and also my parents tried, but always choose like the easy books, so I could finish them faster, which is, I think that's a big deal nowadays. But what happened was, in 5th and 6th grade, they will assign us these reading logs, And to me, as a kid, I thought it was annoying as hell. Like I said, I wanted to be out all day, every fucking day. So I will pick like comic books slash like easy books, with no letters or little to no words. Sorry. So, and I wish I should have done that because, it lowered my reading comprehension levels, which I'm now paying for at my late teens and early adulthood, So, I wish I could have started reading early, and I wish my mom put more pressure on me, like, to improve my reading level and / enjoy reading books. Alright. The 5th and final most grateful thing is my cousins. I don't want to, and the reason, because I don't want to sound like trauma dumping and shit like that, or depression dumping, I like to call it, like depression dumping, is because, growing up, like I said, I was in an enclosed environment, when enclosed I mean the suburbs. So I would so my cousins, they will come over because they were like same age as me, You know, some of them were a little bit older, some of them were the same ages as me. So you know, and they would come over because of their parents. You know, I would get along. You know, family shit happens. You know, personal family shit happens. And you know, they're gone. You know, most of them are gone. Some of them moved to a different city, different states. And I'm just here with a very small family, I like to say. But the other cousin I still talk to is the one who lives in like another county. I just do text every now and then. So yeah. So those are my most regrettable things and also the most grateful things in my life, personally. So yeah, that's the video. So my name is Jubal. See ya.